Hello everyone, and thank you for being here. My name's Riva and I'm the Honorary Treasurer on the board for the TCPA. I also identify as a young person, so delighted to be here and really happy that this is on the agenda. To start off with, we're going to play a little bit of a game to get us in the scene for this very important topic. So if you would indulge me, could you please stand up if you are or once were a young person? That's good, that's great to know. Okay, now I would like you to please think about your favourite memory when you were growing up. So I'm going to give you a moment to think about it. Think about where you were, who you were with, what you were doing. Recreate that picture in your mind and hold it there for a second. And now I'd like you to stay standing if that memory was outside. Okay, I'd like you to stay standing if that memory was with other young people. Stay standing if there were no adults present. And stay standing if there was any sort of risk involved with what you were doing that might cause injury. Great, you can all sit down now. Thank you for that. That was a game that was designed by Wendy Russell from the University of Gloucester and is part of our Voice Opportunity Power Toolkit, which you'll be hearing a lot more about later today, that the TCPA worked on with Sport England, as well as Grosvenor and ZCD Architects. But what I wanted the message I wanted to deliver with that is just a reminder of the importance of freedom to play and explore for young lives and well-being, and set the scene for our discussion today. So to introduce our wonderful panelists, we have three speakers with us today, starting with Dr. William Bird, who is a GP and the CEO of the Intelligent Health and Honorary Professor at University of Exeter. So Dr. William is passionate about getting people active. As a family GP in the 1990s, he pioneered the concept of social prescribing by setting up the first health walk scheme, closely followed by the first green gym. Amongst many roles, William is now a global authority on health and activity and is advisor to the World Health Organization, the UK government departments and Sport England. In 2010, he set up Intelligent Health and launched their flagship program, Beat the Street, which sees communities transformed into a giant game where players achieve points and prizes for walking, cycling and scooting around their local area. Secondly, we will have Tim Gill, who is an independent researcher and author. Tim is a global advocate for children's outdoor play and mobility. A Design Council ambassador, Tim is the author of Urban Playground, How Child-Friendly Planning and Design Can Save Cities, and No Fear, Growing Up in a Risk-Averse Society. Tim is also a former director of the Children's Play Council, now Play England, and a Churchill Fellow. And finally, we'll have Dr. Jenny Wood, who is co-founder and co-director of policy and research at A Place in Childhood, which is a collaborative practice of urban planners, landscape architects, youth workers, educational psychologists, and outdoor learning experts. Jenny has been a driving force behind the initiation and development since 2017, bringing considerable energy and passion to the projects delivered. A leading expert in children's human rights and the built environment, and a strong track record in social policy, homelessness, and assisting people experiencing disadvantages. Thank you, and please join me in welcoming our speakers. Firstly, Dr. William.
Thank you very much, and what a great pleasure it is, and to be on this panel with such great people. I've been associated with Tim for many, many years. He's always ahead of the curve, always been, and has been championing us, as I know so many of you have as well. And today, I just feel there's so much we need to pack in to try and understand what it is about place and children that's so important. I remember when giving evidence, and people have mentioned about the evidence for the levelling up, and when we were given the briefing, there were still MPs and people on the committee who will remain nameless, I don't think I knew who they were, who said, well, why do we need to get, why are children so important for place, And you think, goodness, we've got a job to do. So let's start doing it. So I've got some slides. I'm not sure that's going to work. Can I just do that? So I'm going to talk about some of the evidence, the medical evidence, about why place is so important for children. And I think just getting that kind of basic science in there really helps on a solid foundation to be able to push this argument forward. And then I'm going to look at, again, more data, but it's data, as mentioned in the introduction, about Beat the Street, where we go into neighbourhoods, we go into cities, we go into towns, and we can get up to about 20, sometimes even 30% of the population, half of which are children, and then we ask them questions, lots of questions, and we can go down to street level of understanding what people's perception of the place is. So we'll just go through some of that. I'm going to start with a resilience matrix. It's very simple health. There are just 3 things that we need to do to make people healthy. The brain is only interested in 3 things: to feel safe, to feel valued, and to feel we belong. Everything else fits into pretty much those. When we're talking about social media, are we feeling safe on social media? No. Do we feel valued? People feel valued on social media? Very often not. Do they feel belong? Yes, they do. They feel belong, but how critical that belonging is, it can exclude other things. So literally it's a prism we can do. And then there are 3 domains of our life: the people around us, the place around us, and us, our purpose, why we're here. Simple. And you've got a matrix. So if we look at the place, which we're going to be focusing on today, that's a column in itself. That's a third. That's a big, big part of what we're having to do. And it's about feeling secure. It's about sanctuary when we look at safety. The valued is wonder, beauty, culture, nature, all of those things where the person feels valued when they're going into a place. And belonging is about that familiarity of a place, the cultural heritage that we have. So we can look at place like that. And the reason that's so important is because resilience helps us to deal with stress. So if we have weak resilience, i.e. those places don't feel safe, we don't feel valued in them, and we certainly don't feel we belong there, and those other parts, then you start to get chronic stress. Don't confuse chronic stress with acute stress. We need acute stress. That's really important. Apparently we're meant to have 6 acute stress episodes a day. I wouldn't recommend those, but those stress, it keeps us motivated, it keeps us active, keeps us into a job. But when you don't have any deadlines or anything, you actually do start to kind of fade a bit. So chronic stress is very different. You wake up and you go to bed with constant anxiety and worry. And it's about many, many things which we've talked about. If you get that, you'll create negative emotions. Actually, those emotions are there to protect you. Anger is there to fight. Anxiety is there to flight. All depression is a sickness behavior to keep you away from other people. So all negative emotions actually are protective. And then the unhealthy behaviors, they're all protective. You eat more because you want to keep the calories. You exercise less when you're stressed because you're trying to conserve calories. You don't sleep because you want to be vigilant in case there's a person around the corner who's going to knock you on the head. So all of these unhealthy behaviors are a response to chronic stress. You can't go in there and start changing physical activity, which is what I've been doing for 30 years, and expect people to respond when they've got chronic stress because their body's saying, no, I'm not going to conserve my calories. I'm not interested in any of that kind of stuff. And then that goes down to obesity, gut biome, and then those stress hormones come down. And then I get very excited by this bit, but as we've got 15 minutes, and this is about place in children, I won't talk about chronic inflammation and mitochondrial dysfunction, but that is the key to all long-term conditions. Yes, all long-term conditions have got one problem there, and those 2 things of the immune system and mitochondrial dysfunction. So you can see that if you've got chronic stress and stress hormones, you go straight down to chronic inflammation. And we can start to see things in children's brains and adults as well. So here was a study done from in Berlin, and it was about walking in nature for 60 minutes compared to urban. And the amygdala, which deals with the fear and keeps chronic stress going, was diminished in size and blood flow within 60 minutes. So you see a child in an urban, dangerous environment every single day of their life, that amygdala is going to be bigger and bigger, and that keeps that child hypervigilant and stressful, and that will go all the way down to problems which will start long-term conditions of hypertension and diabetes right from the age of about 5 or 6. We start to see it picking up. Even the heart is starting to be affected, which then comes into being when they're 50 or 60. So that's really scary. Every hour, every day, every child in that urban environment will be having an amygdala, whereas children who've got that nice environment, their amygdala will be downsized and they'll feel far better. The same with the hippocampus as well. The hippocampus also increases in size in a nature, in an environment. And then there's other parts. So pregnancy, let's start the child off in a good way and being connected to nature. And I'm using nature here as a part of a place, but actually it could be a place that feels safe because it's pretty much the same, that there was this, within 500 meters, the birth weight was better when the mother was closer. And that's because it buffers stress. And that's what we're all talking about. It's that chronic stress that's causing a problem, and we need to buffer it. And even air pollution in mothers will cause a child to have a shorter telomere. And the telomere is really part of how quickly that child will age all the way through their life. If it starts short, they will age quicker and they'll die earlier. So air pollution in a mother will cause the shortened telomere in a child that's born. They're starting off with a massive disadvantage. So, not surprising that rural children have a larger hippocampus compared to urban children, and those nearer parks as well, they've got longer telomeres as well. So we're seeing children's brains change according to the place where they live. So there was some other bit as well, which I'll just throw in here. So this is about when you've got this sort of negative rumination. So when you have negative rumination, it means you've got constant feelings of negativity, and there's a part of the brain that does that. It's actually slightly protective, so you focus on the things that are most threatening. In nature and in a non-stressful environment, that negative rumination part of the brain gets switched down and actually goes off. So no wonder when you go for a walk in a nice place, you feel your head is cleared, because that part of the brain has been switched off. If you're in a stressful environment, it aggravates and keeps that negative rumination going, and that goes directly to depression and mental health. Now, I mentioned about the beat street. I'm going to talk about this. Just have to be patient here, because we've asked questions for every one of those 9 blocks. They're not exact fits, but this is for adults. But the reason I've highlighted that in yellow, that one question, is overall, I think my neighbourhood is a good place to bring up children. Now, in this place, I think it was Ipswich, we've got 1,000 respondents. We've actually got 25,000 respondents now. We've only started it in March, but we've been doing it in all the games. And what you can see is the most deprived communities have really negative views about this as a place to bring up children. But the affluent population has a wide. And if you look at all of the questions around, and I won't focus on the other ones, you can see that that is the biggest gap. So the deprived communities just don't like their place. If you notice, I like sharing things with other people. They're equal. So don't think that people in deprived communities got negativity everywhere. They want to give. They've got lots to give. They actually feel optimistic in one area. They were more optimistic than the affluent. They've got friendships and connections. They've got places. They've got lots and lots to give. But the place to bring up children, which is a surrogate marker of safety, is really, really negative. And then we can map it. And this is in Ipswich. So overall, I think my neighbourhood is a good place to bring up children. This is done by ward. We can go down to LSOA. And then you put in over the top of that inactivity. And you can see for adults, I don't think this is a good place to bring up children. Brings up adult inactivity, almost a perfect match. And children's inactivity is not far off either. So the place, okay, we're not talking about causation here, this is correlation, but there's a very, very strong correlation with people's perception of place compared to inactivity. If you look at the children's resilience, which we've also measured, the questions are different, but again, The place area is the one where deprivation has the most. And this time is, I live in an area where I feel safe. Massive gap. So deprived communities. Now, part of that's the child, part of that's the place. Because when we've looked at streets and we've divided people into streets about them looking at the same park, those who've got high resilience think it's a safe park to play in. Those who've got low resilience think it's a dangerous place to play in. It's the same park, the same street, but people's perception. So how we measure place is really hard because it's so subjective. If you've got chronic stress and your amygdala is really large, everything's a threat. Everywhere is a threat, and you wouldn't want to go out into that place. But if you've got real resilience and that hippocampus is large and your amygdala is small, you're going to think everything's a beautiful place you want to go, and you want to take risks, you want to have opportunities. So you can see here that the place, I like the neighbourhood where I live, again, a big gap. I enjoy going to different places. But you can see I feel good about myself and positive. That's quite equal. So these are children who've got, in the deprived communities, who've still got a lot to offer and internally, but it's place that's such a problem. And even after the game we do 6 weeks, 8 weeks, you can see there's a gap that opens up, that those children start to feel the place is safer than before. They start to feel they want to explore more because you've broken that cycle and got them out into that place. We also looked at independence, and 25% to play outside home unsupervised. We've done it by age, sex, deprivation, and we can map it out as well. And this really helps people understand. So often in the more deprived communities, there's more independence because they're left outside more, but that's not always the case. But this is a way that we can start to hone down to those small areas, tiny areas, to find out what people are thinking about the immediate surroundings they've got. And when you do that, you can start to get little hotspots. So this is inactivity, low resilience, and low nature connection. And then you can start to actually look at the streets they live in. Why are those streets so bad? What's going on? Ask them. They'll tell us. And we can start honing in on the hotspots in a place to understand where those are. Because if we don't, and those children grow up, by the time they're 16, they've all gone. And I remember when I gave evidence at the thing, I can't remember the figure now, but I said there are about 950 children, it's not that, I can't remember what it is, who've gone today because they've all turned 16. We've lost them. And then tomorrow there'll be another 950, however many it is. Someone could work it out on a calculator. But we're losing children all the time. And once they've gone, those telomeres, that amygdala, that hippocampus, that brain shape will stay with them for the rest of their life, creating long-term conditions, mental health problems, chronic anxiety, and all the things that we're seeing today. So it's really, really important. Can't tell you that. Thanks very much indeed.
Hello, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm very pleased to be following Anne. I should declare that I am one of the commissioners on the Play Commission. So, yeah, declaration of interest. I'm also very happy to be following Bill for reasons that will become clear in a second. And I just want to kind of also I feel the presence of Colin Ward in the room. I'm hoping there are more than one or two people in the room who know and have some awareness of his work. But if you don't, or if you're curious, then, and you haven't got time to read Child in the City, which you really should, then there's a wonderful BBC documentary on iPlayer called Where We Live Now. That's actually his take on new towns. But it's a really terrific half hour of watching and gives you, I think, a real insight into the close attention that he pays to children and why that matters to place. Now, I also want to pay tribute to Riva, who did the Play Memories exercise, so I don't have to. I want to kind of remind you of what we found out, which was this sort of significant proportion of people who basically had their, our most resonant memories from our own childhood were places where we could have adventures, where we could explore, where adults weren't really around, and sometimes where we could do dangerous stuff. And now I know the nostalgia bell is ringing, and it's been alluded to already, but I think we should pay close attention to those memories. And for me, what they speak to is of the young of our species and our appetite for experience, yes? As we grow up, we want to get to grips with the people and places in the world around us. We want to figure out how the world works and what our place is in it and what our own abilities and capacities are and get a sense of our own agency. And, you know, that's kind of distinctive of the young of our species. And you know, we are nature's most efficient learning machine, and much of what we learn from our own efforts and our own mistakes. So I think thinking about childhood and how it's changed is a good way to open up conversations about place and spatial lives. So I'm going to just share this slide that helps to think about how childhood's been changing. It was put together by somebody called Bill Bird, who really doesn't get enough credit for it. But what you can see here is a map that shows you what you might call the roaming range or the home territory of 4 8-year-old children. But they're in 4 generations of the same family who all grew up in the same city. So the big blob that you can see that takes up most of the map, that's the roaming range of the great-grandfather in this family. He could range 6 miles or 10 kilometers across the city. And then you can see how the circles shrink with each generation until you see the yellow dot up in the top left. That's the son in this family. It's actually a few years ago now, 2007, I think, 2006. He's allowed to go to the end of his street. And in fact, that's more of a kind of right to roam. That's more everyday freedom than most 8-year-olds are allowed. That typically 8-year-olds today are probably not allowed beyond the shadows of their own homes. So what this encapsulates is what I call the shrinking horizons of childhood. And I think it's one of the most profound and one of the most underexplored changes in children's lives. It's happening to boys and girls, children of all socioeconomic groups. It's happening around the world. The reasons why are complex. We've had some of the story sort of alluded to already. But I think one of the big factors, in my view, the single biggest factor, is this speaks to the nature of the habitats that children are growing up in and how those habitats have changed. So if we're thinking about that appetite for experience, by the way, again, it's been alluded to, I think we need to recognize that one of the reasons that children and young people are spending so much time online is because not only are we a learning species, but we're a social species. You know, one of the things that children and young people hunger for is social contact with their peers and friends. And if the reason they're spending a lot of time online is to get that social contact because we adults have made it too difficult for them to get that contact IRL. And if we take the time to ask children where they would like to be spending their time in their free time, overwhelmingly the answer they give is IRL, in real life. So coming back to the built environment, which will be the main theme of my talk, when we ask ourselves what are the kind of places, what's our response as a society to this appetite for experience, for adventure, for discovery, in children, you know, what kind of places are we offering them? Then all too often they look, okay, this is a particularly dismal example. I accept better playgrounds are available. But, I mean, if nothing else, surely this speaks to the contempt with which, you know, some of those involved in shaping our towns and cities hold children. But also, it's the wrong model, okay? And I'm going to say what I think the right model is. That if we want children to gradually, as they grow up, have the opportunity to expand their horizons, then what we need is more than just sets of reservations for children. So the positive framework I'm going to offer you is, again, it's taken from my book, and it's the single most important diagram from Urban Playground, so I'm going to just explain it. It shows you, it's a two-dimensional framework of a child-friendly place. And what it's illustrating is that in spatial terms, child-friendliness breaks down to two dimensions. Okay, one of the dimensions is pretty obvious. It's what you might call the things to do dimension. Okay, a child-friendly place, neighbourhood, town, city, has got lots of choice and variety of places and spaces and things to do. So that's the things to do dimension. But that's not enough on its own. You also need a neighbourhood to be a place where it's easy for children and young people to get around. Crucially, to get around on their own, or at least on foot or by bike, because, newsflash, children do not drive. So it's only where you've got a neighbourhood that has both a lot of choice and variety of things to do, places to go, and where it's easy for children and young people to get around on foot or by bike, that you're in that child-friendly quadrant. There we go. So I'm going to share with you now one place that I hold up in my book as being a kind of lighthouse or an exemplar, possibly, and there's a question mark, the ultimate child-friendly neighbourhood. Okay, it's not a blueprint, it's a kind of indication of the direction of travel. So this is Vauban, which is in Freiburg. It's a district of about 6,000 people. You can see from the image on the left, it's sort of apartment living, medium density, mixed use, lots of things that progressive urbanists like. But one of the things that marks Vauban out, lifts them above that, is that at street level, it's to all intents and purposes car-free. Okay, very, very low levels of car ownership in Vauban. You can own a car, but if you do, you have to park it in a car park around the edge. And so what that means is, as you can see here, the whole of the space between the buildings is available for other uses. There's lots of green space. Again, you can probably see that. But there aren't very many playgrounds in Vauban. What there are attractive green parks of different types, well overlooked, directly accessible from the dwellings, in which there are play features, as here. And here's a couple more examples of that. So again, you've got that variety. There is one of the big car parks. And another thing about Vauban is that in the early stages of this development, tram system was put in, which of course reduces the demand for cars in the first place. So what you've got in Vauban, and this, I won't talk to this in detail, but in the book I offer, it's a kind of idealized, a sort of schema that pulls together what I think are some of the most interesting features of this development. In essence, you've got kind of two layers here. You've got a layer which is about sort of a sustainable urban development. So kind of, reasonable density, well-planned public space. And then you've got a kind of child-friendly layer on top of that, which is about some of the specifics about play features, social space, natural spaces. The school is in the centre of this development, and the school playground is shared and open and available outside of school's hours. So it's that coming together of both a kind of relatively orthodox, sustainable urban development and an eye and some good thinking about children and young people. So that's the picture I want you to have in your mind. And just to say, Vauban is exceptional, and there's been a steady stream of urbanists who've beat a path to its door over the years. And one of the things that everybody says about Vauban is just how many children and young people you see out and active in this district. So it's, if you like, an example of that maxim that some of you may know from Enrique Peñalosa, former mayor of Bogota, who really played a key role in turning that city around. And this is the maxim that children are an indicator species for cities. And I think what Vauban illustrates is that I think that can be taken quite literally, that the presence of children of different ages, with and without their parents, active and visible in this neighbourhood, is the sign of the health of this human habitat, in the same way that if you see salmon in a river, it's a sign of the health of that habitat. So why does this matter? By the way, there are developments that are around the world that are kind of taking this approach as well, in Helsinki, in Malmo, in Vienna. In fact, I'm working as we speak on a development in Cambridge called Hartree, which is also really focusing on kind of thinking about children's freedoms as they grow up, and where the car will be a rare sight. So when I was researching my book, I was lucky enough to go to various places, and I asked city leaders why these are cities that have all taken seriously this vision, this idea. And I wanted to know why city leaders were interested. And this kind of maps out what their answers were. So there's a group of cities that were saying they were investing and putting time and effort into child-friendly planning and design because of children, because of the health benefits, because of a commitment to children's rights and well-being. Then there's a second cluster that were interested in that link with sustainability and this insight that, if you like, a child-friendly city or town looks a lot like a sustainable city or town. It's compact, it's green, it's easy to get around on foot or by bike. And then there's a third, and in a way some of the most interesting cities, that actually talked about hard-nosed demographics and the economy of the city. And in essence, this idea that, you know, a city that is not able to attract and retain families is a city whose long-term prospects are not good. And Rotterdam was the kind of poster child for that. I haven't got time to talk about Rotterdam. And I just want to briefly say that this image, this picture I'm offering you, matches really closely with what children and young people themselves tell us they like and don't like about where they live. So, you know, I think let's try and move the conversation on and respond to what children around the world are telling us. Now, I want to look to the future and how cities and towns are evolving, but also look for other insights from the past in my final segment. And I'm really interested in how children in urban contexts and how childhood's been changing in bigger cities. I was struck by Anne Longfield's call for us to be warriors for children. And it reminded me that one of the things that I think you can say about cities is that they've been a battleground for over 100 years. And that battleground has really taken place in urban streets, and it's been a battle between children and cars. And this story in the New York Times goes back to the 1920s, when North American cities were convulsed with the carnage that was being, pardon the pun, from the growth of motor traffic. Campaigns, mass action, media outrage, and I think you can see that battle rearing its head again at key points in the kind of evolution of cities. So it was there in the 1950s and 60s when Jane Jacobs was famously calling for, amongst other things, the saving of her beloved Washington Square Park in New York, and on the basis of its contribution to the lives of children and families. It was there in the 1960s and early 70s in the Netherlands, and in particular in Amsterdam, where local families literally tore up their streets to help tame the traffic that was causing death and injury. It's there in the movement of the Playing Out group, which is here today, where groups of parents and residents come together, albeit on a temporary basis, simply to stop the traffic so that children can come out and play. And I think we can see it, of course, in the current cultural battles over low traffic neighbourhoods and the like. So I think that to encapsulate this insight from history, I want to offer another kind of maxim from, or it's a slightly reworked maxim from Enrique Peñalosa, who said that we can make a city that is friendly, or a town that is friendly to cars, or we can make a city or town that is friendly to children. We cannot do both. So I think it's time now to kind of face up to that reality of urban planning and design and of our spatial lives and the spatial lives of our children. I say this as a car driver and someone with access to a private car myself. We need to kind of open up a conversation about the degree to which a car-oriented way of thinking about space and place has become normalized, and so that we almost don't see it. But if we do start seeing it, we realize that it has all sorts of problems, and that on the whole, children are the ones who are hit the hardest. So I'm going to close with a leaf out of the book of Chris Boardman, who I'm sure many of you will be aware of, not only chair of Active Travel England, but also chair of Sport England. This is a quote from a talk or a webinar he ran with Playing Out a couple of years ago. I think it speaks to my closing point, but I'm also just reminded of a wonderful story he tells on his website about what got him into kind of walking and cycling and calling for change as somebody who had a pretty successful career as an Olympian. And he said he was having a conversation with his daughter. I think she was about 12 at the time, and his daughter said, "Dad, can I cycle to the park?" And he said it wasn't the question that kind of stopped him in his tracks, it was his answer, which was no. And the park in question was about 1 minute's cycle ride away, 550 metres. And he just realised that that was a terrible indictment of that place that he was living, and that he wanted to do something about it. So he says that he's resolved that when his daughter grows up and perhaps she's the parent and one of her children is asking her if they can cycle to the park, that she'll be able to say yes. And that's a beautiful example of what I want to leave you with, is that when we're thinking about how cities and towns need to change, if we are not thinking about and talking about children, then we are not only cheating children of a happy, healthy childhood, we are also missing out on perhaps the most compelling way to create a vision of a better, healthier, more sustainable place for everyone. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, everyone. It's a real delight to be with you this morning and to be able to present on some of the work that we've been doing at A Place in Childhood and just why we think creating places and spaces for children to develop well is so important. I feel like the two previous speakers have done such a fantastic job that some of the things I would have said have probably been said. So I might focus a bit more on the participation side, I think, because that's something that we spend a lot of time doing at A Place in Childhood, is speaking directly with children and young people about what matters to them. So first of all, a lot of you will already be very familiar, I think, with the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and the fact that this actually underlies a lot of the reason that we need to be involving children and young people and thinking about their needs. And you can see up on the screen that the UN Convention is about balancing what they call the 3 Ps of protection, provision and participation for all children. And the reason that they think these things should be balanced is because children are more vulnerable than adults. They need extra protections. We've heard so much this morning about how important development is. Children, they take in everything, and also they are also much more vulnerable to things like manipulation. So we really need to be making an extra special effort to be thinking about what children need. But you'll see on the other side of the screen as well, what we have is kind of the situation in the UK, but we have it in many other countries around the world as well, is that we talk quite a lot about child protection to the extent that, we do talk about provision as well, but we barely speak about children's direct participation. And actually often in really focusing on child protection, we can take children away from the kinds of risks and environments and experiences that they need to develop into adults that can actually handle challenge and risk later in life. So I kind of challenge us today to think of planning and the built environment professions as not just services that are for adults, which I think, we know that they're universal services, but I think we have a tendency to think of them as adult services rather than child services. But actually, planning is a child service, just like anything else that looks after children. And so if we can use that framing, we can think more about how we can create spaces and places that really work for them. So to bring this into the kind of the wider context then about why children need to develop well, obviously we've heard that this has always been important, and some generations have had some experiences that others haven't, and vice versa. We haven't necessarily found any kind of perfect childhood yet. But at the moment, we have multiple, what we're kind of seeing as intractable crises and existential threats that we need to find solutions to move through. So we have a climate emergency where we have a limited amount of time in which to act, but we also have a lot of citizens really engaged in this agenda, children and young people being a demographic that really want to be involved in these decisions. But we also have political polarization, which makes it quite difficult to work through these decisions and to find ways through this. But actually, it's kind of often at this kind of chaotic point where we have all of these different ideas floating around. If we can play with that and we can think about what we can do, this is where we can start to break through. And that's actually where children, as people that aren't yet conditioned to the way that we've always done things, can present different ideas, different solutions, as long as we can help them on that journey to know how to build those skills up. We're also facing a big demographic transition. So I think we all know that our society is aging and societies across the world are aging, but we're also facing up to a situation in, the next few decades where the replacement rate is going to start to fall to a level where actually populations in many countries are going to decline. And that includes like the UK. The reason that our population is growing at the moment is mostly due to immigration. It's not because actually lots of children are being born. And that's something that we're going to have to kind of work out solutions. That could be quite a big burden on younger people that come through the system. So we need to be thinking quite big about how we can transform our societies to deal with these kinds of changes. And a lot of politicians aren't thinking this long term into the future, but if we can create the spaces and places where children can develop the skills to think about change and challenge, and that we can work with them, then we can start to think about how to move through these. And of course, we also have a couple of other existential threats that we don't know too much about, like generative AI. We don't quite know what the future is, but we certainly need a population that knows how to tell the truth from fiction, knows how to understand how to interact with these new kinds of technologies that we've not seen before. And also at the same time, we have many countries across the world where democracy is declining. A lot of people don't feel heard. We could be facing situations where we have more kind of authoritarian leadership. So again, we need children and young people that have the skills to be responsible citizens, to give their voices, to stand up for what they believe in, and to kind of make the changes that we want to see. Like a lot of children feel quite overburdened with the idea that they're the ones that have to solve all of these issues. So we kind of need to be working with them now to give them those skills and show that this is actually a community effort, not something that we're going to just kind of put on their shoulders in a couple of decades' time. So that's not to depress you all. I know that that's kind of lots of big things, but the great thing about children and young people is that they are really adaptable to this and that they want to be involved. So we know that we've got our mental and physical health challenges. I think we've probably gone through enough of that this morning, so I won't dwell on it, but we do need to find ways to kind of move beyond this, that are kind of community-centered and not just about creating more child and adolescent mental health services in the way that we often rely on, because actually we've heard a lot about how when you ask children want to be together. And also a lot of young people we work with actually tell us that they're lonely. They want to be around other people. They want to feel part of a community. So it's not just about giving therapy to children. It's about creating environments where they can come together and volunteer. I think we heard about that from Anne as well, and just actually start making changes to what might be getting them down. So I think it's really useful to look at the skills that we know we need for the future. So Skills Development Scotland have developed a tool called Skills 4.0, and this is kind of their vision for what schools in Scotland should be trying to push forward in the teaching. So we kind of need to move to a different style of learning so that we can have these kinds of skills, and these are the kind of things that we'll still need even if a lot of jobs can be done by AI or computers. We still need to be able to be curious and creative. We need to learn how to make sense of vast amounts of information, how to think critically, to have social intelligence, collaborate, lead, and adapt to all of these different things that are happening. And a really core way that we can learn these skills for the future is to play, to learn to cope with uncertainty at a point where it's not, do or die, at a point where you can actually relax into it, you can have fun, you can play with different things. And these help us learn to deal with complexity and risk rather than become afraid of the challenges we have. And so this has never been more needed, but in a context where outdoor play has been in decline for some time. But I think, we have heard already this morning that there is lots of hope because we can do lots of things about this, especially if we're planners or, we work for councils. We have the kinds of levers that we need to start pushing for better environments for people. So Just as an example, I've got on the screen, this is Lila's walk to nursery. So Lila is my colleague Anna's daughter, who is here today. So I hope I do justice to their walk. But basically, Lila is taking in absolutely everything about this journey. It's a whole experience, and she's seeing it completely differently to how we might see it as adults, especially if we've got that planner kind of mindset where we see this as a kind of space for this and for this. You see the Anna and Lila set off down from their home. They count where all of the litter is. This is a bit of an obsession. So you can kind of see that already at a very young age, she's picking up what these kind of hazards are in the environment. They walk through the jungle, what we might see as just like a woodland path. They cross the big road. They have to be careful of fast cars. They're starting to navigate risk and understand the different things kind of in the way of where they need to go. They say good morning to the ducks at the weir. They're like developing these relationships with nature and understanding, you know, how some things stay the same, some things change. They go through the spooky tunnel. They look at the poppies in the pavement. You can see that nature is a bit of an obsession, and it often is at this age, and actually all the way through primary school as well. Nature is often like top of the agenda when we speak to children and young people. They talk to the cat that lives in the big house, cross the troll bridge, so there's some storytelling and some fantasy coming in here, run down the big hill to the river, and then say good morning to the lollipop man. So through this, there's kind of those markers of the journey that are always consistent, plus also things that will change over time through the seasons, different relationships being built. And this is Lila at 3 years old learning what her environment has to offer. And luckily, this is quite a safe, nourishing environment. So this is Leith in Edinburgh. So it is very densely urban, but we have the Water of Leith, which provides, you know, a lovely kind of break, a very natural space through the city that she gets to really, she gets nurtured by that environment every day, which is really, really positive. However, I don't think any of us would have to go all of that far from, say, a place like this or a place like that to find environments that aren't nearly as nourishing for children and young people. So we have spaces where, you know, there's quite a lot of things that aren't maybe very mentally stimulating, or there's actual hazards in the environment, or there's signs of a lack of safety. So these are all in the central belt of Scotland. So it's like Edinburgh, Glasgow and Falkirk, all of these examples. And I think the one that I think really exemplifies this, if you'll see right up here, we've got a space that is meant to be for children's play. It's been designed for children's play where they can learn about crossing the road, riding their bikes and their scooters, dealing with risk. But if you look closely, you see the whole place is completely covered in smashed glass. And this has been like this for years. And the children, you know, they just want it to be cleaned up. But trying to get that cleaned up is like, you know, who cleans it up is a really difficult situation to actually navigate because we put so much adult complexity on improving the environment. So is it an environmental health issue? Is it a waste management issue? Is it an antisocial behavior issue? If we clean it up, will it just get all broken again? But within all of these kinds of discussions, the children are just like, well, we just can't play there and we just don't feel safe. So there are quite a lot of markers in young people's environments that maybe will make them feel that they can't go out. And I think we've heard plenty about this already. And also markers, I think it's important to remember that a lot of the teenagers that we speak to through our work, they've never actually seen positive change happen in their communities. So they actually often feel quite down and out about the possibility of moving forward. So it's also, we've got an opportunity to show them that, you know, things can change. So what I really want to focus on for the rest of this presentation is why we need to get children and young people involved in these decisions, because it's actually something that they really want to be involved in, and they've got a lot of the information that's really going to help us make spaces and places where they can develop well. So you'll see we've got this kind of infographic on the screen where you can see that there's benefits to children and young people there's individual value. They can develop, you know, self-esteem, greater appreciation of how decision-making works, democracy, feel that they're part of something. They can also learn how change happens. So we often hear that, you know, young people, they just have no idea how something can go from that to that. And we can actually bring them along that journey, be honest with them, and show them, well, you know, that's actually quite an easy change to make. We could go out and do that tomorrow. This is a longer term situation, and they appreciate being part of that. And for us as adults, there's just information that we absolutely need to know. because we're not going to know it from anyone other than children, because they're often smaller in stature, they often have a more visceral understanding of what's safe or not safe, they're often really observant of their environment and what's going on and how it's changing. And so if we don't have this information, then we can't make decisions in their best interests. And also, you know, we've heard today that children don't own cars. They're very locally based. So they either don't go out because they don't feel safe, or they do go out, but unless someone else is going to take them somewhere else or they're allowed to use the bus, they're going to use what's around them. So if we're thinking about more sustainable neighbourhoods, the best experts are children and young people, because they don't get in a car and leave that neighbourhood every day. They know what it's like. And also, it can be a really positive catalyst for better conversations with adults, because most adults do want better places for children and young people. And sometimes by getting the children and young people's input, showing it to the adults, they're often surprised by how much the children and young people are picked up and just how comprehensive this information is. They're also often shocked and kind of feel quite motivated to do something. And also, because children and young people often see things from a different point of view, they might be more likely to be proposing solutions that kind of cut through some of that noise, whilst I'm sure a lot of us are quite used to kind of adult consultations where maybe there's not a lot of positivity and there's not a lot of opportunity being brought to the table. So in terms of, for both us and for children and young people, this effective dialogue really benefits intergenerational relationships, which are actually something that are often at quite a lot of tension at the moment. We find one of the big things that teenagers tell us is that they want a teenage hangout spot, but that is so hard to sell in some communities as something that is worth having. But having these dialogues can, you know, show that not all children and young people are causing trouble, and also that by having a place, they might cause less trouble, and we need to have these discussions and understand each other more. And finally, the creation of more child-friendly environments also confers benefits to inclusive environments, because children and young people are not only the youngest and most vulnerable members of our society, but all of the other protected characteristics, they also have them. So we can kind of get information from the most vulnerable of every demographic, and that's going to help us actually create places for everyone. So just briefly, I just want to go through a few of the things that really show just how much children and young people know their environments and how useful it is to have them involved in these things. So we've got a toolkit. It's a how-to guide on co-creating local neighbourhood plans with children and young people. And I think just the first thing to say is that they're really good at it. You can see the Langley's Primary School's 20-minute neighbourhood plan here, and I don't think we can see it big enough on here, but they were doing Beat the Street at the time, so they were really, really enjoying that. So there's actually some stuff on there about Beat the Street. But you can see that there's things in their neighbourhood that they want to protect, things that are really positive about their experiences, but then also things that they want to change to improve things for themselves, but also for other members of the community, because they also tend to be really sensitive to what other people need. And actually, they're often telling us, you know, this doesn't work so well for my grandma, this isn't so good for disabled people. And also, you know, we're often hearing things that are quite shocking, but again, we need to hear it if we're going to make anything that can be improved for them. The other thing that is really good about working with them is that they're good at consulting other peers. So we've worked in schools where actually the children and young people create a plan, and then they present that at assemblies or classrooms, and they get the input of everyone else in their school, so that what they're creating is like a consensually agreed plan that they can then speak to with confidence. And one school that we worked with in Inverurie in Aberdeenshire, they gained survey responses from 450 of their peers, and that's more than half the school role. So what they were creating actually really speaks to everyone. And they also went and did focus groups with teachers and pupils at the additional support needs school on the same campus as them, and that also really transformed their understanding of what the place was like for young people that were more vulnerable than themselves and even less heard. So this then means that we can create something that really includes everyone. What we've also found is that they really want to be part of our shared future now. So we all know that there's a big climate emergency movement amongst young people wanting to make change. And in some of our projects, we've taken this focus on the just transition, which they are very good at understanding, this idea of meeting everyone's needs whilst adapting. And they can come up with projects, what we could do in our community, things that they might do themselves, things that they want to work with other members of the community on. And they're just very good at doing this. So you can see some of the examples here from, again, we've got Huntly in Aberdeenshire, Inverurie, and then Jedburgh in the Scottish borders. So they're also good at creating like these imaginary islands. That's how we start thinking about the future. It's kind of a metaphor for a 20-minute neighbourhood because they're now cut off from everywhere else. We need to think about what we have and what we need. And then they can take that on further and develop it into projects, which are then things that, you know, we can find ways to take forward in planning and beyond. So finally, just an example as well of how beneficial it is to bring children and young people and stakeholders that typically don't engage with them together into one room and really discuss, you know, what they want to change and how these things can happen. This then means that the adult stakeholders can help deliver things on the ground, children and young people feel heard and understand how change happens, and there can be shared plans for the future. And also, if we invest in getting the input of children and young people about their neighbourhood, this isn't just helpful for, say, a local plan. This is helpful for, you know, community planning. It might be helpful for the police on antisocial behaviour. It might be helpful for all sorts of different locality-based initiatives we have. So actually, if we invest in hearing from children and young people, that can kind of cascade upwards into lots of different plans and policies that we might have. So it's effective and it's efficient, and they're really, really good at it. So that's just what I really wanted to put forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to our three wonderful speakers for sharing their perspectives. I'm going to open up to questions from the audience. So if you could say who the question is directed to or if it's an open response, and we will direct it.
I'm Naomi Fisher. I'm a founder of Roam, a project to facilitate children's unsupervised play in nature, and I'm also an architect. So this topic is something I've been fascinated and immersed in for a number of years, and also from a personal perspective. My kind of challenge or question really is, I mean, every time I come to events like this or watch them online, I always learn something new, and it just seems that evidence is mounting in every direction. But are we preaching to the converted sometimes? Who is not here that needs to be? I wonder, are there any GPs in the room? Are there any volume house builders? Of course, Dr. William Bird, of course, but it's GPs, volume house builders, traffic engineers, transport consultants. Who else do we need to listen to this, and how do we get them here? And it's to anyone on the panel who wants to answer.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. There often are like people that we're not hearing from, but I think a really good way to do this is around specific projects where you have these multidisciplinary kind of professionals. And if you can get in and work with the children and young people and then bring them into a room with the children and young people. So maybe it's not a conference like this, maybe it's much more grounded and bringing them in on something where it is completely their remit to be building in this space. They need to come and hear directly from the children and young people. And yeah, we have had some situations where we have had, say, engineers in the room, house builders. That's not something that we managed to crack yet either. But I think others in the room may have been able to do that. But engineers often have really, really useful perspectives actually, and are really good at thinking through the real practicalities of involving children and thinking about spaces for them. So I think that we can do this on the local level. I think that's the way to start, get a project and then bring everyone around the table and just make sure that children and young people are part of that table as well. I hope that's somewhat helpful.
Thanks, Jenny. And I'll just add that I think it is a very valid question. One of the reasons why I and others kind of talked about our own childhoods is because I think that's something that you can take away, because there's a really big question. You know, we all care about children and that's why we're here. How do we get other people who aren't currently thinking very much about children to do that? How do we get the list of people that you mentioned and others to do that? And I think tapping into the kind of emotional resonance of what a good enough childhood looks like and what that means in terms of space and place. I think that's the way to do that. And I'm certainly having conversations with volume house builders, a few, with traffic and highway engineers. You can find people in all of these professions and disciplines who care about this stuff. Sometimes they're in a minority. And so one of the things that's really valuable is to just, be nice to them and kind of nurture those positive conversations and reassure them that there's a wider constituency who are kind of on their side. It doesn't mean to say you give them carte blanche, but they're definitely out there, and figure out ways to showcase and share what they're doing and to get it into a wider audience. And there are others in this room who are doing that pretty effectively, I think.
And I just agree. I think we do need to get the children in the room as well, to get their views. But I think the way we've been doing it is very much local, and to get a steering group. So when we do a Beat Street, we go into an area and we work with that locality for 3 months, 4 months to get a steering group. So we've just done it in Featherstone near Wakefield. 120 people on that steering group, every single community group engaged to how do we get a better place. And it works. Anyone from Burnley here? What a shame. So Burnley, when we went there first, they've now officially called themselves an outdoor town. And the reason they did that was because they were trying to tackle climate change, biodiversity, and well-being and health. And when we put the Beat Street in there, suddenly you got a huge number of people going out and celebrating the heritage of Burnley. It's a mill town. The outdoors is really important in its history. And that was the emotional cue to get in. It wasn't climate change, it wasn't biodiversity, it wasn't it's good for you, or the walking or cycling or that. It was, let's celebrate this amazing heritage we've got, which we feel proud of. And obviously new people coming in didn't have it, but there were enough who were there. We managed to get 7,000, I think it's 7,000 trees. Every 100 points the school got, they got a tree given by donation. 7,000 trees. Because it was an outdoor town, it took 2 weeks to get permission to plant all those trees. He said it would have taken 20 years to get every single tree, health and safety. But as the culture now is an outdoor town, anything to do with the outdoors is now priority for the city or town. And I think that's how you try and get it from the grassroots up, but it gets into the local council. They're not going to wait for policy from Westminster. They're not going to worry about anything like that. They're just going to do it themselves, and they have done.
Thank you. I think we have a question there in the back.
Hi, Alice Ferguson from Playing Out. So we came up with the Play Street model years ago as parents of young children to try and give them back some of this freedom to play out on their doorstep. And it's a really simple idea, and it basically just removes the traffic danger from the space on children's doorsteps. And what we've seen from that, and the way that that idea and the movement has grown over 15 years, is that what's needed for children to be able to play out on their doorstep is actually quite simple. And we also see that in other places that, like Tim mentioned, that have been built with that in mind. So we kind of know what the conditions are that children need in order to have that experience. And the other thing that the Play Street movement has shown is that parents really, really want that for their children. A lot of parents do, to the extent that they're prepared to put quite a lot of time and energy into creating these short spaces of time for children to do that. So I suppose my question is, is there a value in continuing to consult with and involve children in specific projects and specific decisions about spaces, or do we really know enough about what children want and need in order to just get on and do it?
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Alice. No, I think we definitely do know what we need on the grander scale, but I think that it is intrinsically powerful to involve the children in that process, because regardless of whether or not we think we know the answers, children know their place really well, and they may say things that don't surprise us, they may see things that do surprise us, but the more they're involved in making that change, the more they understand change can happen, the more they're likely to change the hearts and minds, I think, of others as well. Because I think we, as we've kind of spoken about, we can talk about as advocates for as long as we want, but sometimes people just ignore it. But if they actually hear from a child that's having a really difficult time doing something that is really simple that person used to do in their childhood, then actually it does change what they think. So I think it's part of rebuilding community. We have to involve them, but that doesn't mean that we should not do anything until we can involve them. If we already know the answer, we do need to do something as well.
Totally agree. I think their stories as well really help as well. I mean, we've just seen some of the stories coming from there. They're really powerful, really emotional. There's a cautionary tale in northeast Belfast where there was a lot of regeneration on one of the rivers, and it was straightened up. They had about, I can't remember, 30 or 40 million pounds from the EU to get regeneration to this area. And it was pretty derelict. The bedsteads in the thing, what trolleys, it was not a very nice area. But the people living there, they did consult to say, how can we make this a better place? But they consulted to a point, and then they did this amazing transformation. And there were meadows, the rivers changed, it was cleaned out, the bridges were redone, there was a cycle path, there was a footpath. And when they measured the number of people using it, it absolutely went right up. But they did a before and after about the local people living there, even though they had consulted. And the number of people using it went down, and inactivity went up. And they thought, what? What's happening? And when they interviewed them, the families, they said, it's not our place anymore. It's been gentrified. Those people coming in are all visitors from other parts of Belfast, and we've lost those bedsteads. We've lost those memories of children. We've lost that rubbish old bridge, which I remember so much playing as a child. And they just didn't feel they belonged anymore, so they kept away from it. And I think that's just something we have to be really cautious about.
That is a cautionary tale, and I'm also reminded that you know there's a long tradition of children's participation in planning, going back probably back to UN Habitat and before that Kevin Lynch, the UNICEF Child Friendly Cities initiative, and you know, on the whole, the empirical evidence, the academic evidence on those programs is that they have not had a massive impact on the built form of cities. They may have had other outcomes, but I think it's reasonably well recognised historically that, you know, and we can see it, can't we, in the cities and towns and housing areas that are being built today. That, so there is a real question about what does effective participation look like. I'm not sure we yet know enough about the answer to that question. I think it's an important question, but I think sometimes there are some who work on children's participation who just think all we need to do is ask the kids, or just ask the kids and then tell the results to the people in power, and that will make a difference. And I don't think that's sadly often the case for various reasons. So I'm still learning and reflecting on all of that. But I think one of the things is to pay close attention to what we're learning about effective participation. I know that's a question-begging term, but for me it is where the process has a clear impact on what gets built or changed. And that's what I'm most interested in, and where I think we need to know more.
And if I could just add to that, sometimes it's also about the process of taking the children through and what they learn and gain from that as well, in terms of more ownership of their place, because after all, they will be the future generation and the future planners too. So I think also important to highlight that outcome that might not be immediately visible in the built environment too. Great. I think we have time for one or two more questions. Yes, so should we go here and then to the back?
Hi, Steve Hayward. I'm from a landscape architecture background, but I work in active design, active environments now. So I've kind of gone into this strange role. So it's more sport, physical activity, even though I'm not from a sport background. I suppose my question is about developers, really, working with developers. But in the 90s, I worked in America. I worked for the theme park industry, so all about playable, immersive, experiential spaces. It was in the 90s. And James Kunstler was a critic of poor design, poor developments. He wrote the book Geography of Nowhere, Home from Nowhere. And I sort of witnessed the huge estates, you know, the huge developments there. And I think, Tim, in your book, you show a picture of one in Texas, and, you know, where I knew I couldn't get a pint of milk. I couldn't, like, go to the laundromat without going to a strip mall. I didn't have a car. And now I'm sort of, I work with developers and planners at the moment, and you know, we haven't moved on in terms of these huge scale suburban developments still being built, where play isn't really still part of the conversation. It is with some. And Tim, we were around the table in London recently with land improvement, so a developer that does want to make a difference. They want to know what to do to make a difference. But actually, they're still working on identity and profit model, most of the developers. Now, sports pitches get quite a big, you know, sort of around the table conversation in terms of developments, but play doesn't. So really, what do we do? What do we need to do? I know, Tim, we spoke about this, but in terms of the wider audience, what do we need to do to make play, you know, an important part of this planning process, that the developers then give it as much attention as, for example, sports pitch policy, etc.? If that makes sense. I've been a long-winded way to get to the final.
Yes, great question. I wonder if, Bill, would you like to answer from a sort of health background?
Yes, I've been actually doing some work or concept with Atkins realists who are very similar in really wanting to get it right, and working out how to do it, doing quite a bit of work in Bristol at the moment. I think what they say is that they sometimes, although we think the developers are behind, some of them are ahead, and actually they are really chomping at the bit, but the council just wanting not quite there. And I think we just need to match the two together, because sometimes it's the council ahead, sometimes it's perhaps the developers. But what I think we just both all need to know is how the evidence is now just so overwhelming that if we don't do it, those children are going to be blighted for the rest of their life, and that's our future of a country. You know, if you want to put it that way, the future development, prosperity of this country is being put at risk by not having play as a priority for children. I think that's all we have to say, and we've got enough evidence. And Tim's been working on, probably from a non-medical point of view, but how important developmentally it is for children. So I think that has to be the kind of core. And then we've mentioned about other partners, the ICBs from the NHS, and public health. Anyone from public health? Yay. I mean, working with ICBs and public health, I think this message now is really coming in, and therefore any local authority putting in planning has to have play, because that is the future of that city and town. So it's getting the narrative right of importance. And it's probably not even, though, it's what do we want the future of this town to look like? And that's, I think, how we get it across. It's a narrative, it's a thing, but it's got to be the councils and the developers working together. And I don't think all developers are bad. Some of them are, as we say, are really far ahead, and we've just got to get the best of them to be able to do that work.
I think we really need to break the tyranny of the fixed equipment playground as being, you know, that it's still so often the go-to solution for house builders and many planners, designers, and architects. And there's Bill mentioned the evidence. There's a really clear evidence. If you look at the neighbourhood built features, so features of neighbourhoods where children play out more, what are the features that are most important? It's not playgrounds. Actually, it's not even necessarily green space. It's walkability and greenness. Okay, so that's systematic literature reviews that gather together all of the relevant academic evidence from around the world. In short, show that kind of walkable, low traffic areas, can I say the phrase low traffic neighbourhoods, are most closely linked with more kids playing out more. So it's like, if I want people to take one thing away from this morning, it's about walking and mobility. It's the glue that for children kind of knits neighbourhoods together and opens up not just places to play, but the act of getting around. Children move when they play and play when they move. And I cannot overemphasize that.
Thank you. I think on that note, we're going to wrap up this session. I'm sure the speakers will be around if you'd like to ask any more questions. But just to summarise some of the things we heard about the struggles facing young people, about mental and physical health and wellness, about chronic stress, about the shrinking horizons of childhood. We also heard about the goals to change this with a lot of triples. We heard about being safe, valued, and belonging. We heard about protection, provision, and participation, self-management, social intelligence, and innovation. And we also heard about potential solutions that we in this room can work towards, about the war against the car, about the impacts of nature and a walk as a buffer for safety, about giving people places with choices and mobility, and allowing participation, because children are the future planners. So we hope that this brings it back to some of the things that you thought about when you stood up at the beginning of the session about being outside, being together, and having places of freedom to play and explore. And with that, I'd like to give a very big thank you to our three speakers. If we could have a round of applause.